An observation, a practical observation, because we just had this Regional Crime Symposium. It looked good. You know, it even, to me and all, it even looked good. But then you made a point, and it got me thinking, well, but what is it actually going to come out of this that's going to help us?
Yes, and that's exactly the point. As you know, I consider it a form of deflection, a very good form of deflection, which is really another an opportunity to have a talk fest. But this time, our Prime Minister took the lead in it. It was on a scheduled meeting. So it certainly made him look as a leader, but a leader in what crime? And which of the countries that really have the crime problem? It's us and Jamaica, you know, and all of the solutions, it's implementation, you know, talking about it as a health crisis is really, it's no offense to you, Prime Minister, whoever else came up with that idea, but it just put in mind how the United States dealt with the whole issue of the drug, which is really behind. All you spoke about is the effect, you know. You told us all about what is the effect of crime, you know. But you didn't tell us what are the solutions there, because I think you have a very good idea what is the solution, as many people do have. And, you know, is the emperor with no clothes? Someone wrote an article. I didn't say that. It was in the Express, Noble Douglas. No, I think it was, let me not get the wrong person. I think it was Martin Daly talking about the emperor with no clothes. People just saying what they want to hear. They know, and you know, and we know that telling us about the cost of crime only reinforces the fact that you have failed to deal with it. And having this conference, and you leading the conference on something that everybody would have to agree on, when the real problem is not being addressed. I saw Israel Khan mention that why didn't they talk about the money laundering? Why didn't they talk about the human trafficking? Why didn't they talk about the drugs, which is at the bottom of, and feeding this? And on that point, Mia Motley, I guess they don't like you to talk too much about it, but I have to mention her, because Interpol set up an office, I think I've mentioned it before, I think about a year ago in their garrison, in their main office, and they've had great success in dealing with the interdiction of drugs. So the crime thing sounds like another talk fest. Are we going to have implementation? I saw we had the minister, who I like very much, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent. They are not members of the CCG. We are not members of the CCG. Jamaica is not a member of the CCG. Most of the islands in Eastern Caribbean are not members of the CCG. So I think it's only Barbados, Guyana, Dominica. And what that means is on him calling for the death penalty. Well, if he follows the case law on it, which I have had to refresh my memory, just as most recently in the cleaner in May, 2 cases that came to the people of Privy Council on the death penalty. They say the death penalty is not unconstitutional, and the savings provision, which saves laws that were passed before independence, are still valid. The Caribbean Court of Justice has taken a completely different route, and the language has been very, very condemning of the position that we as independent countries take towards keeping in place what they call a calcified piece of legislation, that's the savings provision, reminiscent of colonial times. So is the death penalty on the table? Oh, no. What they needed to talk about is what is the causes of the crime before you start talking about the effects. I mean, it's like, just the last thing I will say on that, you know, it looked like another form of deflection. You know, you're running out of ideas of how can I deflect? How can I deflect? But all you just did is tell me that how much it's costing us to have crime high up on the agenda and how it's affecting our budget. So what are you doing about dealing with that?
Well, not only that, I mean, this deflection cost us a lot of money to host.
Yes.
But Karen, give the Prime Minister where credit is due.
Which is the credit on?
At least he was the leader in the deflection. He actually led
But he's good at that.
He took a first-hand approach at it. I give him credit for that. You know?
But that is what he does best. Do you realize, especially on national security matters, both he and his minister, now he is the head of the National Security Council, and the Minister of National Security, they have almost said to themselves, it's not our problem. It's the police, it's the parents, is this, is everything else but them. Okay, but they know, as we all know, that we talked about it, the procurement legislation on another show I did. Two major pieces of that legislation, have not been proclaimed. The procurement section 7 has not been proclaimed, and the disposal of real estate provision has not been proclaimed. So we are operating under whatever they're operating under, which they have said, when I had Munila Lalchal on the show, he said it's costing us about 5.1 billion per year in leakage because of the fact that we do not have a regulator in place. So before you start talking all of that talk, Mr. Prime Minister, pass the Revenue Authority, deal with the procurement, and proclaim the key provisions which you have not proclaimed, because without those key provisions, the procurement legislation is worth nothing. Instead of doing that, you do as you always do, blame everybody else, deflect, and your latest deflection is hosting a symposium. And I don't know who was impressed with it. It was nice to see all these people from all over the Caribbean come there, but has it brought us any closer to implementation and dealing with the cause, not the effect?
And there is the thing. All of the talk is more or less, we've heard it before, call for the death penalty. We've heard that locally before. And I think ultimately it goes back to, it's just talk. It's just talk.
And in fact, you realize what they focus on was the effect of the crime, not the cause. Just let me just say one other thing before I let you interrupt me. Before I let you interrupt you. It is just noteworthy. I am not saying it is so I don't want anybody jumping down my throat. But I do know I'm not the only one. Many people who I consider to be very brilliant people have said it to me privately. When it was supposedly with drugs, with the crack cocaine and the cocaine, the code words were inner city, and we know what they meant, right? At that time, they were thugs, they were criminals, lock them up, 3 strikes and you're out, very rigid probation requirements. So sometimes you started spending more time having a little ounce of marijuana than you spent for the actual crime. Suddenly, in America, when it hit the Midwest, you can interpret Midwest and inner city how you want to. Suddenly, when it became a Midwest problem with the meth factories and all of these young people from the Midwest being hooked on drugs, suddenly it turned into a health crisis. And we have to rehabilitate. They're not thugs. They're not criminals. So now the Prime Minister taking crime and borrowing from that playbook to talk about how we have a health crisis in Trinidad is to deflect from what is really what his responsibility is. And I would just say one last point is, one last point. If he wanted to really, really deal with the crime, and I think CARICOM has asked them to write to the United States. So that was a very good outcome. But if he really, really wanted to deal with it, he would partner with the Interpol, which is made up of the US, made up of a huge international organization. He can partner with them and work with them to deal with the disruption of the drug trade. Because once they do that, they're going to deal with the money laundering. And yes, we're going to have a hard time, and at the same time creating opportunities for young people. And we've got to do it because look where people have reached, that they are afraid to leave their homes in the evening.
I wonder if, coming out of the symposium, I wonder if we've finally answered the question, who are the criminals? Who are the real criminals?
So we have to move on because Karen has something else that she wants to talk about. So for the sake of that, I know, Professor, you're going to call in, and I agree with you. We are not enforcing our rules. There is no law and order. Well, just in general. But
where? In the country or on the show?
In both.
Oh, I don't know.
So